As you can see, we are in Washington, D.C., and this is TCT 16. And despite advances in treatment, mortality in acute myocardial infarction that's complicated by cardiogenic shock remains really high. So there is short-term mechanical circulatory support devices that can be deployed to support the endangered circulation, and we're at TCT to talk about something new. It's the Impella CP versus the intra-aortic balloon pump in acute myocardial infarction complicated by cardiogenic shock, and it is called the IMPRESS trial. And the data is online ahead of print right here at JACC. And what I'd like to do is introduce you to the author of this, Dr. José Henriques, who is from an MD, PhD at the Academic Medical Center and the University of Amsterdam AMC Heart Center. You are a professor. So let's talk about this IMPRESS trial. Give me a little background first about the issue that we're talking about, because it is really it's a big topic.
It is. Actually, the background of it all is that I am always been interested in acute myocardial infarction. And it's interesting to understand that currently the mortality in patients with acute myocardial infarction are not no longer driven by those who just come into the hospital, because they'll do fine. But those who come in cardiogenic shock, they have an average mortality of about 50%, despite revascularization.
Right.
And we used to do balloon pumps, and we looked into the value of that and was really low. And 10 years ago, I actually got into contact with the Impella. Actually, I looked them up because it looks so promising. I've been involved with Impella. I still love the technology. And with the new CP, I thought, well, why don't we just do a small pilot study in two centers that know how to deal with the technology.
Now you're comparing this with the IABP.
That's right.
And that went from a class 1 indication to a class 2A indication to actually don't use this.
To a non-recommended.
Okay, so where are we with the IMPRESS trial then?
Well, I think we're actually part of the downgradement of the IBP because of some meta-analysis we did prior. So it went from class 1 to class 1 to 2. And with the German IBP shock trial, it became a class 3 basically indication. So Impella holds a class 2B indication, and not so much for proven clinical efficacy, but as it can provide more circulatory support. So I would say still in patients who have, let's say, are in demise, are in circulatory demise, at least you know that putting in an Impella or any mechanical support device will yield a better circulatory support of that patient. The question is, how can we now look for those patients who will benefit?
Right.
Who will benefit from them? And I initially, when I did this trial, I thought, well, this is the cardiogenic shock patient population, and because those are the patients we have. It's no longer in the old days where you had somebody with a MI, he's laying in a room and he progressively went into shock. Now, currently, the cardiogenic shock patients are usually somewhat younger patients who come in after cardiac arrest, still hypotensive, with a huge MI. So these are the patients that we see now as cardiogenic shock patients. So many things have changed. So we perhaps are putting in devices in patients who benefit less from it. And perhaps that's one of the lessons we can take out from this study. But still, there is, of course, a higher support levels with this device. So where does it take us? I think it makes us a little bit more humble, on the one hand.
Right.
And we really need to understand, well, perhaps a routine usage of a device, although it's cardiogenic shock, but you need a little bit more of a selected approach to what patient will benefit the most. Otherwise, we'll keep up with these neutral studies. And everybody wants studies in cardiogenic shock. But there's no one cardiogenic shock. It's a variety of conditions. Right. Yeah.
So in terms of, you actually have a second paper. This one is a research letter, I believe, and also a JACC. Yeah. And it's more the same, but you've done a meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials. I think you mentioned briefly. Yeah. Let's talk about that for a second, because that's interesting.
Yeah, so we completed this study, which is the Impella CP, which delivers 3.5 liters per minute against the balloon pump. And two other randomized smaller trials have been performed using the 2.5 Impella, so performing a little bit less, contributing a little bit less circulatory support. And I wanted to combine let's say the three studies to see whether you could find a trend towards a reduction in mortality or a reduction or an improvement in LV function.
Right.
But in the 95 patients who are in the meta-analysis, so extremely underpowered still, even with the 3 studies together, there's no real signal. There's no signal towards survival benefit, and there's no signal in the LV function in survivors. So what's going on there? I don't know.
This is obviously a tough crowd, as they say.
Exactly, yeah, I think it is.
And where are we in terms of what's next?
Well, I think first the dust needs to settle down because everybody's still a bit queasy about the results. I think we need to define a specific patient population that will benefit, and perhaps they are there. They need just to be a little bit more worked after. So you need to do a little bit more work before you identify them. And I think we should also think that perhaps for the patients we are treating, perhaps even bigger impellers. So they have a 5.0 impeller. You require surgical implantation. But well, perhaps we have to let go the fact that percutaneous insertion is easier. We have to do what's best for the patient.
Right.
And I think perhaps we still need even more support. But I don't know. It's also an idea I had earlier on. And so I really don't know where we are. I do believe one thing is that the disease is cardiogenic shock. And what the machine does is to improve the circulation. So I do believe that these two are connected. But at this time, I still don't know how to connect the dots here.
So what do you want to do next? What are you thinking about?
Well, I think what I would like to do is to really think about a more focused study in patients who have proven cardiogenic shock, but also with extremely poor ventricles, and perhaps support them even more. So perhaps take that time to have the surgeon come down and put in the device, and to see whether we can perhaps not even look only at mortality, but that's really going to be very difficult, but perhaps to find surrogate endpoints that will show that really organs are being better perfused. Perhaps we can look at lactate levels or at renal function to see whether we can really make that change. Even if it were just for a couple of hours, we know whether we do something on the organ perfusion, because that's not really out there yet. Perhaps it has to do with a little bit more support before we can really show that we're doing something to the organs.
When you learn something, would you come back and talk to me again?
I will.
This is a great topic, and I thank you very much. This is for JACC, and it's online ahead of print from the TCT meeting. We have both the paper and the research letter. And for CardioSource World News and CardioSource World News Interventions, I'm Executive Editor Rick McGuire.